to affair-proofing a marriage that stands out above the rest, and that is to pre-decide. Make the commitment to stick to those vows you made at the altar and do whatever it takes to maintain them. But that sounds pretty simple, right? So today we're going to get details about how to actually make this simple thing work. So, Dr. Kim, with all of the effective things to prevent an affair, they all start with pre-deciding. Will you explain the term to pre-decide?
Yeah, I think to me, it's in your marriage is realizing that the enemy really does want to destroy your marriage. And so many things that happen, we just have to be aware of that.
Mm,
And I think to realize that I'm not as strong as I really think I am sometimes.
mm,
And, I need to be, pre-deciding helps me to stay within the boundaries, the parameters that I want to stay with my marriage.
hmm,
Sorry. Um, so if I had pre-decide to always be faithful in my marriage, um, it's like, okay, I pre-decide. It's not how close can I get to the fire with, it's how
mhm,
far can I stay away from the fire. And so what I need to do, I don't need to think, well, it's okay to have lunch with someone or to do this and take those baby steps that in on their own are not really that harmful, but they lead
mhm,
to other things. So it's staying as far away as you can and to consider the cost.
mm,
What would happen if I made a decision like that? What would
mhm,
it do to my wife? What it would do to my grandkids, my kids,
mhm,
also marriage, the people on our team that trust me. I mean, so there's just I think when we take time to do then it's pretty easy to decide to pre-decide these are
mm,
things I'm not going to do. These are places I'm not going to go. And so I think when you pre-decide, I think a lot of times we just kind of try to fool ourselves. We put
mhm,
ourselves in a situation, think, yeah, we'll do that, but we don't really think it through, and then we find
mhm.
ourselves doing something really stupid. And so I
Yeah.
think we pre-decide, we say, I'm not going to go there, and whatever it is, okay, so I get asked to do something that is doesn't fit into my parameters, I can say no, or I can look for a
Mhm,
compromise or a way around that. So I think the whole thing is, I think one of the examples I thought of with scripture is back in the Old Testament with Joseph and when he was serving Potiphar and that Potiphar's wife had a thing for him. And
mhm,
so she arranges it for him to be in her bedroom and she makes advance to him and Joseph
mhm,
runs. Now he still gets
mhm,
in trouble, but I mean, she's got his cloak in his hand. So I mean, he knew I shouldn't be in that situation. And so I
mhm.
got out of it. I think to me, that's such a good picture of don't go there, but if you get in that situation, you can still run.
Mhm, absolutely. Yeah. I think I love that you're kind of saying, like, right off the bat, you're setting the bar a little bit differently. I don't wouldn't say a higher bar because the bar is, like, faithfulness either way, but it's, like, rather than just saying, like, "I'm just gonna white knuckle it, and I'm not gonna give into that temptation," it's more like, "I'm gonna make sure I'm not in a situation where I'm thinking I could handle temptation and not ever give in, or I'm not gonna get myself in a situation where I'm, like, that close." So I think there's a lot of humility in what you're saying, which is kind of one of the phrases you've said a lot is that the most vulnerable we are and we think we're not vulnerable, which is
Absolutely.
a great sort of heart check. Is that if you just think you can make it and I'll never do this or that, that is so prideful and it's not very helpful either.
No, it's interesting you said that. It reminded me of a couple of people that I'd work with that said, I can't believe I did that. And
Mm,
then we kinda get back into it. Well, they never decided not to do that.
hmm
So they get in the situation thinking probably just, "I can handle temptation." And so you
hmm
don't do the things to pre-decide, and you get in a situation and you haven't pre-decided, so you make a mistake, or
hmm
you really cause something to cause harm to your marriage. And so I think that all that goes together
hmm
in pre-deciding.
Yeah. So along those lines, what does it take to like then follow through and make pre-deciding work as an affair preventative?
Um I think you have to have for us, I think it's having a vision for your marriage. I think
Mhm.
Nancy and I, uh, early in marriage, no one on either side of our families had ever had a divorce.
Mhm.
And I think we just committed. We didn't want to be the first. I think when we really went through struggles in the early years of the marriage, one of the things that we kept coming back to, we're not going to be the first to get a divorce. And that
Mhm.
constraint, I think, helped us in. So I think what do you want your marriage to look like? Do you
Mhm.
want to live 50, 60, 70 years with this person and have uh, be faithful the whole time and see what
Mhm.
that can do in a marriage and work through things? And so I think, how do you look at your marriage? And then I think once you decide that, I think you commit to it
Mhm.
together and to God, that this is what we're gonna do. And so I think you go through those steps.
Mhm.
Then, okay, how do we carry this out? What
Yeah.
boundaries do we need to set? Nancy and I talked a long time ago what our boundaries should be with members of the opposite sex,
Mhm.
because we were really young when we got married,
Mhm.
and everybody else we knew and ran around with was single.
Mhm.
So some of those conversations happened then because we couldn't
Mhm.
do the things that we saw our single friends doing at times.
Mhm.
And so we set those boundaries. And then I think just completely being honest with yourself,
Mhm.
with God, with your spouse. I think sometimes when I tell people that temptation is not a sin, I get a funny look.
Mhm.
But we know Jesus was tempted
Mhm.
and he didn't sin. And so temptation is not a sin. It's what
Mhm.
we do with it afterwards. And so I think that all goes into making pre-deciding work. Get this vision with each other, put the
Mhm.
accountability in place, set the boundaries. And, when you struggle, tell each other. I had a good friend that um, he was, he's written some book, good guy, but he was in his study and he had started talking to an old girlfriend.
Mm.
And so he did that about twice. And then he realized this didn't really catch up with her, and I'm kinda starting to get some of those old feelings I had for her. So
Mhm.
he checks out of that deal, goes down and talks to his wife, is
Mhm.
honest with her and say, "I need to tell you this because this is an area I didn't know I was vulnerable in, and let's talk
Mhm.
about it and what can I need to do? I'm gonna tell my accountability partner. I'm gonna ask
Mhm.
him to keep me accountable. I've told this person that it was great talking to you. Have a great life, kind of deal." And
Mhm.
so I think all of that goes into making it work too, being that
Yeah.
accountability and being honest with each other. And it's okay that you were tempted, and it's
Mhm.
okay that you maybe even were headed in the wrong direction a little bit,
Mhm.
but that you stopped and you told your
Yeah.
spouse. I think that's important.
I think so too. And it reminds me of the scripture in, I want to say it's James. Whoops. I didn't have it in my show notes because it just, as you were saying this, it reminded me of one of my favorite scriptures for when I am tempted in different things. Resist the devil and he'll flee from you. And that's like a great picture of he's coming, but you can resist him. And when you resist, he'll flee from you. And that's great because if you make it through the temptation, without giving in, like Jesus made it through without giving in, then, eventually at the end of Jesus' temptation, the devil walks away. He's gone, he leaves. He has no more
Yeah,
power there. And so it's like kind of making it through it, it gives you that encouragement that, oh yeah, I can, survive temptation. Temptation doesn't mean I have to give into it. It just means I
absolutely.
have to resist it. So I think that's a good encouragement.
I think if we look at it, it really is a battle.
Mhm.
And not that we have to battle every day, but I think we have to be prepared to battle every day.
Mhm.
And I think pre-deciding helps us to be prepared to battle.
Mhm. I think so. I think that's a great point. And I think too a lot of what we're talking about is sort of keeping a healthy view of marriage or healthy mindset of marriage. I know that probably one of the biggest areas that is tempting for me in my marriage is to just be so selfish and just look
Mhm.
for my fulfillment and look for my validation or gratification. And so when I have a selfish mindset, it's a lot easier to be tempted, to look outside my marriage because if Brian isn't like fulfilling me because because he's a person,
Yeah,
he can't fill me up. He can't make me happy or he can't make me feel good about myself. So that puts me in a really dangerous spot, but it stems from that selfish mindset that I'm just looking for him to do something he can't do in the first place. So he's obviously not going to be able to do it. And so that's going to leave me kind of like grasping for something more. But then if instead I flip it back to like, okay, actually, actually what marriage is designed for us to both sacrifice and to
yeah.
love like Christ loves, that's a very different view of marriage.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on something that I think we all struggle with selfishness. I think
Mhm.
it's the root problem for all of us and most of the things that get us in trouble.
Yeah.
It's just being selfish. And it's easy sometimes, especially I think in the culture we live in now, to justify our selfishness that we feel like
Mhm.
we're entitled to that, or my spouse should be doing this or shouldn't
Mhm.
be doing that. So we get unrealistic expectations and then they don't meet them. And then we justify the
Mhm.
step that we take that's not going to be good.
Yeah, that's so true. And that reminds me of something when you talked with Deborah Fileta pretty recently about it was about health, being healthy, but she talked about how when you look at what you can change in the situation, it's really empowering because you're not waiting for your spouse, but you're actually going, okay, whether they do the thing I want or not, I still have it within my power to act with integrity, to do what's right. And that's a good place to be because we can choose that, not based on what somebody
Absolutely.
else does.
Absolutely. I just finished a deal that's in my dispatch coming out in a week or two,
Mhm.
but I titled it What If? And I think we
Mhm.
go through these. What if my spouse did this? Well, I'd be happy. What if my spouse
Mhm.
did this? Well, our marriage would be better. And what I said, and you got to point the finger back at you. It's
Mhm.
what if I did this? What
Mhm.
would it make? Would this make my marriage better? What if I was kinder? What if I was
Yeah.
gentler? What if I listened better? And put it back on us instead of thinking, well, that's what they're supposed to do. And some people get locked in. Well, until they do that, I'm not doing anything. Well,
Mhm.
that's just the height of a problem that's not going to get better.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just continue to do those things.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
It's not
Oh,
not
yeah.
good.
Most of what I know, I've learned from my own experiences.
Yeah. Well, but it's like once you kinda, like, shake back out of that, it's like, "Oh, man, that was really a bad situation, like, that was never gonna go well."
Exactly. And we think, why do we think it would?
Mhm. Yeah, it's essentially basing your action on just scorekeeping, like, keeping score the whole time, and that is never gonna add up.
Absolutely.
So, this is a tough one. I'm curious what you're gonna say, but what if you don't trust that your spouse is committed to this pre-decision as you are? Can you ensure that your spouse won't cheat?
No. I wish there was a way we could do that unless you want to
Mhm.
lock them away somewhere. That's not going to happen. You can't control anybody's behavior that your own. And so
Mhm.
I think that's hard because I think I've seen people do all kinds of things to keep their spouse from cheating. And if the
Mhm.
spouse has made the decision to cheat, they're going to cheat.
Mhm.
And so I think for someone that's in that situation, I think it would be really good to talk to a Christian counselor and kind of,
Mhm.
okay, this is where I am on this. This is where my spouse is. How do I handle this? How do I do this in a way that sets my boundaries, that it lets me be who God created me to be, and yet set those boundaries in a good way. And
Mhm.
how do I do that? And how do I handle those things? Because I've
Mhm.
seen people that spent years trying to change their spouse,
Mhm.
and you just can't do that. Only
Yeah.
the Holy Spirit can change them.
Mhm. Yeah, so do you see people trying to change the spouse because they have cheated in the past or just because 'cause they're fearful or suspicious?
I think some people bring the fear into marriage. Maybe
Mhm.
their dad cheated on their mom, or their mom cheated
Mhm.
on their dad, or something like this. And so they made a decision in their mind somewhere that, well, maybe my spouse might cheat on me. May not have
Mhm.
been even that much of a conscious decision. And
Mhm.
so they kind of come into marriage with their guard up. So they're
Mhm.
always checking the phone, their spouse's phone, or doing stuff like that. Well, that's not a way to live either. You've got to make what I tell people, you're in this relationship. This would be miserable to do this the rest of your life.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
got to has your spouse done anything to make you feel that way? No,
Mhm.
but I know they might. And so it's like, okay, you got to trust them and work on it from that standpoint.
Mhm.
And then I think there's also those who maybe they've been in the relationship, been in their marriage. One of the spouse went outside the marriage, came back in. They chose to work on it, but that's tough. And I've seen people
Mhm.
make it, but the person who went out has to be super accountable as you
Mhm.
build something back because building trust is hard. They've got to be willing to do whatever it takes forever.
Mhm.
And so if they fall off of that a little bit, I mean, I think there's a lot of healing that has to take place. And so the other spouse, what I tell the other spouse is you can't control this. You've got to know that your spouse was accountable to you because they chose to do that, or they
Mhm.
chose to do things in a way that were going to make you feel safe. I'm sorry. They
What is
were
in that drink?
God.
Sorry.
But
Uh,
they, people they just don't go places that they don't need to go, and
mhm,
so all of that I think goes into that you can't ensure that they're not going to cheat.
mhm,
What you can do is pray and
mhm,
love them, um, and be willing to trust.
mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff there in what you just said because I think if we if we're treating somebody with suspicion, that's not really breeding like closeness or intimacy.
No,
It's going to feel a little bit off. And so, you know, whether or not the spouse has, made a full commitment to being faithful, if you're treating them like a cheater, you're not going to feel very close. Um
and I get that. I mean,
mhm,
there's that risk. You don't want to get hurt like that again.
right.
I've
Mhm.
obviously, Nancy, I've never had that happen.
Mhm.
I can't imagine what that would have done to either one of us if that happened. So
Mhm.
I get that part of it.
Mhm.
But again, if I went outside the marriage, she couldn't change me. That's got
Mhm.
to just be something between me and God and letting Him work in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do have I mean, it reminds me of the podcast episode we have that we've aired it and then it was actually re-aired it last summer, Amber and Arlie's story where they go into a lot of detail about exactly how they built that trust back. And I think that's a really good insight to like the willingness to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to build trust back. Um,
Yes,
and
I think
also, yeah.
that's a great podcast. I would encourage
Mhm.
anyone that hasn't heard it to go back because they really did things right. There
Mhm.
was tough love, there was
Mhm.
repentance, there was accountability, there's building back trust, and
Mhm.
so they did it really well, and that is a marriage that's thriving now.
Mhm. That's awesome. That's so encouraging.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think too, like what you said, Dr. Kim, speaking to a Christian counselor about that, if you are concerned about the potential of your spouse being unfaithful, um, I think that's a place where, you either have to choose to trust or figure out, sort through what's going on there, what's behind it. And if it's coming from some kind of past baggage or past wounds, that would be a great thing to go ahead and sort through because wherever there's something that keeps coming up, there's a pattern that you could get some healing for. Like God can help you process through that and heal that so you don't have to be so worried or fearful. And then you can work on building trust with the spouse. You can grow that so that you can feel
Absolutely.
more trust there. Um, and the reason I thought of this question, Dr. Kim, is because if you do an internet search, everyone wants to know how to prevent affairs, right? And so we're talking about it from like, what can I do to prevent? But then a lot of the internet searches suggest that the question is, what can I do to get my spouse not to do this? Which
Yes.
is, it's a totally different question.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's anything that you can do,
Right.
honestly.
Right. Well, and
I've
so
had
yeah.
women that have said, "I'll have more sex," this stuff. All that's, great, but if it doesn't make it not happen.
Right. Yeah,
Your
I know
spouse has
we've all
gotta
seen it and
embrace it.
it's terrible. It's heartbreaking. But to come at it from that angle, it's going to be a losing battle if you need to ensure their behavior.
Right.
So I think for each of us to look at this, like what can I do to build this marriage up? That's helpful. But I also think that one more thing on this topic is, if there's some serious red flags, don't ignore those. If you can't trust your spouse, if they're not trustworthy, if they aren't where they say they're going to be, they don't do what they say they're going to do, if they're having, making decisions that are clearly not in health
Right.
of the marriage, you need to address those.
Absolutely. I think things that I've seen, and I think it's interesting if you really have given yourself a marriage and you trust, so you're not going to be looking for things. You don't want to
Mhm.
just all of a sudden, all the time, just be checking up or something like that. You've got to live in trust.
Mhm.
But if you start feeling like your spouse was so transparent before, but now they're not. They're kind
Mhm.
of vague about what they're doing.
Mhm.
Maybe there's time they're not accountable for, and you
Mhm.
begin to see a pattern, not a one-time thing, because we can
Right.
always do that. Maybe you see that they're on their mobile device a lot, and
Mhm.
when you come in, they seem to get off of it
Mhm.
quickly, which could mean a number of things. But
Mhm.
and then I think just if there just anything that seems out of place, not quite as connected, different behavior.
Mhm.
all those kind of things. And I think it's important to address it. It's
Yeah.
just to say, hey, things are not where we are. There's something going on. Most people honestly are going to deny it.
Mhm.
But sometimes just getting it on the table, because I've also had people that were confronted and then came back later and said, yeah, I've been doing this, but I
Mhm.
don't want to, and I want marriage to work, things
Yeah.
like that. So, but I think it's okay. I just don't want anybody to think that, okay, I need to be kind of on high alert most of the time, because
Right.
that's not fun.
No.
That's not impressive. And I think people get obsessed with that. So I
Mhm.
think if you just see some consistent red flags,
Mhm.
then maybe it's time to have a conversation or look, is something going on?
Yeah. Sure. And I think too, I mean, one other red flag is if you don't feel like you've built good trust or connection in your marriage, like if you're not feeling unified or united, and whether that's from the past or from personal baggage or not, I think that's something that you can grow through that and you can build on that. You can definitely work towards that together, and then doing that will help you to feel more trusting of each other.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like what you said in the past, Dr. Kim, about when when you and Nancy struggled with your marriage, when you really struggled, you thought, well, I don't want to lose my best friend. And so it's like, what things have you done to build this marriage into a place that you both want to stay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to me, with all we're talking about, the best way to proof your marriage is both of you to put 100% into your marriage.
Mhm.
Because what Nancy and I built, it makes all the other alternatives not look very good at all. In fact,
Mhm.
they look horrible. And
Yeah.
so I think that does help it, where I think it does kind of, not that I'm still couldn't be tempted. I mean,
Mhm.
I've got to always keep that in mind,
Mhm.
but that I wouldn't trade what we have for anything or anybody. And I
Yeah.
think if you build that and put God at the center, that's really the best way to proof your marriage.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It's true. I think in those hard days of marriage, it's like, well, would a custody battle be more fun? It would not. I've seen them. It's terrible.
No,
Like
I know.
if you go through literally thinking through what would be the alternative to this hard work, it's just more hard work. It's different, worse,
Absolutely.
like it's not good. So,
And so if there's any way to work in and save a marriage,
mhm,
or to do the things that we're talking to prevent something like that happen,
mhm,
uh, then you can really enjoy your marriage more all the time
mhm.
and build it into something that's very precious to you and to your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think one final thing. Well, I guess this kind of gets us into the next question. So I'll say both at once. So my next question is, what are some personal red flags, and what do we need to check ourselves on? And so what that was making me think of is, it's like if you are just kind of in that unsettled place within yourself, if you're not pursuing your
Mhm.
personal health, um, and not kind of thriving as a person, then you'll need to take some steps and some ownership over your own personal life that God has given you and to steward, to take some steps towards health, independent of whatever it does to your marriage. And
Absolutely.
I think it will help your marriage, but I
Yes.
think you have to take ownership of that and make some choices to make yourself healthy.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, if I each day or whatever, think about, is there anything that I'm doing or saying or thinking that I wouldn't do or say or think if Nancy was there?
Mhm.
And if there is, then I need to deal with that.
Mhm.
And the same thing you could do with God. Am I doing, because God already knows all that. So,
Mhm.
but just kind of a self checkup on yourself. How, I think it helps, because I think we can
Mhm.
justify things so easily.
Yeah.
And I think, well, that's not too bad. Well, would I say that to Nancy, or would I
Mhm.
let her know that, or would I let her know I was thinking about that?
Mhm.
No.
Mhm.
So that's a red flag for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Do you have any other ones you
That
want to
would
share?
probably be, I think that's what, like, me, I'm sure there's different
Mhm.
things that we need to do. Certainly, if you have been, I think pornography is a good thing
Mhm.
to bring up, because it's so prevalent and so many men struggle with it at one level or other. And so if you've gotten away from it, but then you kind of knew you're kind of tempted to look at something online again, and then you find out that you're doing it. I think, if when you cross some lines, like that, that should be a red flag to you. I don't want to go back into that. I know it's
Mhm.
not good for me or my marriage, things like that. And so just kind of are those areas that maybe have affected it in the past in a
Mhm.
negative way. And so the red flag is I don't a warning sign, and the right answer is I'm not going there again. I'm going to do
Mhm.
what I may need to get in some counseling. I may need to get back in my small group. I may
Mhm.
need to do this so I can get myself back on track.
Yeah, that's good. I think another one that I thought of is if you don't have a habit of praying or being in Scripture, I think that's one of the best ways to kind of reorient our heart and our mind around God's purpose and God's plan for our life and for our marriage. And so, if you don't have a daily time where you're talking to God or spending time with God, I think that's a dangerous place to be because Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah in the Bible says that the heart is deceitful above all else. Like the human
Yeah.
heart is, we can't trust ourselves. And so we have to have God's help. We have to invite his conviction, which is painful and uncomfortable, but he'll answer. And if our goal is to follow Jesus, um, then that's going to require some sacrifices and it's going to require some disciplines and some habits that might be difficult, but also will be really life giving.
Hmm. It's very
So,
good.
so staying close to God and allowing Him just to speak into our life is a really helpful way. But also, I have two other ones, which is one is if you're shying away from honest conversation with your spouse or friends, or not wanting to talk about certain things that are kind of like the example you gave earlier, Dr. Kim, of like the reconnecting with the ex-girlfriend or whatever, if that person had continued down that route and not wanted to talk to his wife or not disclose that, that would have been a red flag.
Absolutely.
And also ignoring a gut feeling. If you have a gut feeling about someone that they are not a safe person to interact with, and I don't mean physically safe, but I mean emotionally safe. If you pick up on something, there is something there. You don't have to know what it is. You don't have to follow it down the rabbit hole and figure out, what's that feeling. But I found that sometimes there is sort of a just a gut feeling that somebody's putting out some sort of a vibe. I
Yeah.
don't know how else to say it, but and I've learned um, just through seeing people go through things that if you feel that, it's okay to just say, you know what, that's not a friendship for us. If you had a couple friends and
Absolutely.
one of them didn't feel comfortable for some reason, there's probably good reason for that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna add on to that. I think as guys, we need to listen to our wives. I think wives
Mm,
are much wiser in that than we are. I think God gave them an instinct.
mm-hmm,
I've had some women in the past that have said, he hired this person, and I
mm-hmm,
knew the first time I was around that person that I just felt something, and so they
mm-hmm,
talked about it, and so the guy didn't fire the person, but put him in a way just to kind of protect himself, and so
mm-hmm,
I just do think women can sense some things that we don't sense. And I
mm-hmm.
think just listen to your wife. If she's seeing some red flags, don't blow that off.
Yeah.
Listen to what she's saying. And I think, too, when you're saying about being honest with God and that relationship with Him, I think for a long time I thought that if I didn't talk to God about it, He didn't know about it. And that
Oh.
was that just is not true. And so it's
Right.
like, well, if I don't pray, if I don't mention this in my prayer, then God
Yeah.
won't know about it. No, He knows. And so
Yeah.
why not be open and transparent? We know He's forgiven us. We know He has a plan for our life. We know He wants
Mhm.
what's best for us. So why not dive into that instead of acting like, well, God didn't know about this. He was busy, doing something else.
Right.
But He wasn't. He
Yeah.
was busy with you.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to live light and free when you're letting go of that stuff, letting God in, not trying to hide stuff from spouse, from God. It's a lot easier. You just can
Oh my gosh, yes.
you don't have to watch your back. It's
Yeah.
fine. That's
Yeah,
a
if
good
you're
place to
working on
be.
transparency, I think God is really the first place to do that
Mhm.
because He is gonna embrace that, accept that, help you through that.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, what if there has been an affair in the past? What do you recommend?
It's hard. I think forgiveness has to be a part of it. I think
Mhm.
sometimes And I get it. That can't be, most people can't just say, "Oh, I can forgive you. It's great."
Mhm.
No, it's usually a process. And as you see, as you work on it, it becomes a reality over
Mhm.
time. And so I think that forgiveness is a huge issue. Rebuilding trust is essential.
Mhm.
Um, and trust takes time. It takes effort. You know, when there's
Mhm.
been an affair, it does change things. That doesn't mean your marriage can't be good. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean it can't be better than it was, but it changes things.
Mhm.
And so I think the forgiveness, and if both are in it together to work on it and make it different. And I think the other side of it is if your spouse is not all in, or they're still seeing the other person,
Mhm.
accepting the reality at some point that, like we've talked about, you can't control them. You can
Mhm.
only control yourself, and that you might have to make some tough decisions.
Mhm. Yeah, and of course, we'll say that a Christian counselor would really help with that process, really be helpful.
Absolutely.
They've seen it
Absolutely.
before, they've seen it all. They can offer, perspective and help that you can't do on your own.
And I think that, if a couple comes in together and they're struggling with things like we're talking about today, I think as a counselor, with some things you talk about in counseling, with maybe homework you give, the counselor's going to know pretty quickly whether you're both all in or not.
Mm, mhm.
And if I see that one's all in, the other isn't, I know that we're very limited in what we can do. And the
Mhm.
things in the marriage probably aren't going to change. And it's trying to help this person walk through this.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And then we do have an online affair recovery course that we have created at Awesome Marriage, which is a great step in this process. So it's not going to do all the work for you, but it will give you a great guide from some couples who've been through it and then through some experts to help you walk through the process. So we'll
Yeah.
have that link in the show notes as well. So starting to close up, the idea of pre-deciding sounds simple on on the surface. Is it really that simple?
I think it's I think it's something we have to do. No, it's not
Mhm.
simple, but I think
Mhm.
it's something that if we're going to live our lives the way we want to, that we vowed to do, that honors God and honors our spouse, it just makes sense to pre-decide some things
Mhm.
and take those off the table. And by pre-deciding and having a plan, you can do that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like if you don't have this piece, if you don't have the pre-decision, then no other step you take matters. You can make as many boundaries as you want, but if you haven't already committed, not just at your wedding vows, but this renew like continual desire to stick with it, that decision, all the other, you know, boundaries you could draw or whatever you could do won't matter as much if you're not 100% committed to that. So I think
Absolutely.
it's simple, not easy, like most
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, and I think you want to involve God in the middle of it. God, I am
Mhm.
pre-deciding to do this, and
Mhm.
prompt me, let me know if I get off track
Mhm.
or whatever. Help me to continue to follow through with this.
Absolutely.
And then you got a partnership.
Yes. Yeah. And then ideally with your spouse as well. So all
Yes,
three working together and
absolutely.
um, being honest with them and being along for that together. And I think it's important too to say that, great things take hard work, to build a great marriage. It might look like other people have it easy. They don't. It's not easy for any of us. It's just,
No,
it takes work. So the more you're willing to accept that and realize that it will take hard work, the more you're going to enjoy it because you're not going to expect it to just float on by.
right, right.
So,
Cinderella left the building, right? I mean,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So, Dr. Kim, do you have any final piece of advice for us today?
I hope this has helped some people. I
Mhm.
think there's things that we can do proactively, but like pre-decide, that are really going to keep us from getting in trouble.
Mhm.
And I think for some couples that this is kind of a key, that maybe they have not done that, that this will help you get on track with it, whether
Mhm.
that involves just making decisions, repentance,
Mhm.
asking forgiveness, whatever that is. But to listen to this, and if it fits at all, to decide what your next step is, to pray about it, and then take that step.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. That's a good word. Well, this has been a helpful conversation about what it means to pre-decide and how effective that is to prevent an affair. So make sure that you are following us on Instagram and Facebook. Find Dr. Kim over on TikTok because we're doing a lot of fun things over there. We've got date night ideas, we have marriage tips, couples challenges, memes, all kinds of stuff. And I'll make sure those links are in the show notes. Next week on the podcast, we're going to talk about in law issues. That should be fun. So make sure you tune in for some insight on how to deal with those. And
I'm sure nobody has those problems,
no,
but we felt like we should.
we don't hear anything about that at all.
No, not at all. And I think too, if you enjoyed today's podcast, it would really be nice if you take a minute to leave us a rating and a review. Leaving a review on iTunes is really one of the best ways to help the show be more visible. People who haven't seen it yet, and there's a lot of those people that we want to be a part of this community. There's a lot of marriage content out there. We're passionate about bringing God's purpose of marriage into the podcast space.
Mhm.
So your ratings, your reviews can help us make that happen. And you follow the link in the show notes. You can to the review page. I would love for you to do that, and would really appreciate you helping spread the word about Thoughts of Marriage podcast and help us get the word out.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening, sharing your time with us today. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.